Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and today we're looking at the Disney Afternoon Collection. This is labeled on Steam as a 2017 game, but that would be very inaccurate. The collection is from 2017, but it is a collection of Capcom, basically NES games from 1989, 1990, 1991, 92, 93, 94. And these are all the Disney cartoons that would have been part of the Disney Afternoon cartoon lineup that people of that era would have grown up watching a little bit of. Although, I don't really think a lot of these cartoons went very long. Like 3 seasons maybe. Now weirdly, much like Mickey Mouse and the other cartoon characters from Disney, these are all pretty much abandoned characters too at this point. You're not seeing new Chip and Dale cartoons being made. There was maybe a live-action Chip and Dale TV movie that was released a couple years ago. I don't think they've done anything with TaleSpin. They may have made a new Darkwing Duck cartoon. They did make a new DuckTales cartoon maybe a year or two ago, where they introduced a female young duck. Now, as for the collection, you really don't have a lot of settings here. Your button layouts is basically a joke here. Right bump pauses, left bump rewinds because these are just being emulated. They're expecting you to play with a 4-way D-pad layout, basically. Start and select. No share button, no home button, really, of consideration. And then they're going to go X button and A button for a B-A lineup, which, honestly, I don't know if I'm really going to be able to figure that one out. Like, I think I would prefer that the button would be just this and that. And yeah, that's basically the way you would train any emulator like RetroArch to play these games. Well, you can play it with a keyboard, but that would definitely be a mistake. Now, it is weird that this collection loaded when I first launched it, and then has quite a long time in which it saves. On top of getting the games, looks like you've got a decent amount of just gallery images here. Extra things that you're paying for that you really would not easily get if you just were to try and rip a ROM from an NES cartridge or download a ROM from someplace on the internet that goes unmentioned. Which, yeah, this looks nice, certainly, but it is just 10 pictures. And then you would move on to the next thing. Now, it's weird, they grabbed my username from Steam and put it in the lower left hand corner, but it doesn't seem like they're really doing anything with that. Let's see, you could start a whole slideshow, but to move, it's probably easier to just do this. A lot of this is just cover art stuff. Nice to have, certainly. Inherently, when you get to games like this, or in this case collections, where it's going to be kind of hard to just review one game in the collection without considering the fact that the collection includes all the other games, is Weeby, the female duckling, which she did show up at the in the original DuckTales. Weeby did. I think they introduced a different female in the duckling. it is kind of only because of Donald Duck that you would have DuckTales exist in the first place. I don't think kids were chomping at the bit for duck-based entertainment. Let's go back here and hide the captions just to show all this. Now, I covered a full-on remake of the DuckTales game, and I would highly recommend playing the remake. It's really hard to say to play the original game unless you just have that kind of nostalgic for the original game. But these are NES games in particular, and it's important to remember that a significant amount of the NES games that were made, and games of those first and second generations, or technically NES is considered third generations consoles, those early 80s games in general are often actually impossible, and if they're not actually impossible, they are significantly frustrating and difficult. So here's a flattened scan of a flattened box, which this does kind of highlight the level of quality that you probably would have even in a collection and an archive of a NES box, particularly one you would be willing to flatten and scan. There's going to be a bunch of cracks and creases on it. These cardboard things were just not designed to last that long, although the Japanese box here looks like it is in slightly better shape. But yeah, until we can figure out a way to go back in time and collect collectibles in pristine, brand new condition, that's about as best as we probably can ever do. Although it is also worth mentioning here that it's not the best layout here. If I actually wanted to look at the box, I don't have a way to zoom in or pan over the image, so you just have to get closer to the screen, I guess, if you wanted to try and read the text on the back. Now, these games were decent, but I'd also say they weren't really the most popular games for NES. Yeah, I should have a lot more to say here, but I'm coming up blank. I had all these plans to try and say something critical or intellectual while looking at all of this, and I really am just coming up with blank, saying, alright, this is historical and interesting for the history of it, but I have no idea what the image on the left there is. That's probably a commercial, and most of these are just flyers that would be inside magazines, advertisements, things like that. This may be highlighting Game Boy ports of some of these games, which, yeah, there was also a lot of that, where you'd make an NES game or a Sega Genesis game, and then you would make a black and white port that was either exactly the same or very similar or completely different. So yeah, not a lot of extra stuff there. We do have a whole collection here of, I guess, soundtrack albums, if you wanted to listen to that. Which, in all fairness, if you're going to try and install a front end, like, say, Emulation Station, and have a setup, a build, focusing on these specific games, you'd have a hard time getting the art in the right place, putting that extra polish on it. But at a certain level, I guess what you really are doing here is you're selling what effectively are, if these was coming out in the 80s, 40-year-old games. You're selling a bundle of 40-year-old games that people might be nostalgic for, but you're still selling 40-year-old games, which arguably maybe should just be in the public domain, although Disney would never agree with that. Let's see, weirdly it seems like they may not even have a full soundtrack for every game. No, I think they do. Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's Chippendales 2 and DuckTales 2 look similar enough to DuckTales 1 and Chippendales 1. So, yeah, let's hop into the games and kind of show this off, though. So, yeah. The thing I would say here is you probably don't have a good reason to play DuckTales in this form factor, since it's been remastered and remade. Although, the time attack and boss rush here might make an argument, because those were features that weren't really in the remake. So, move, jump with the B button, pogo jump, or swing your cane with the A button. And then you're getting full instructions here as to what to actually do. Yeah. DuckTales is a kind of unique platformer. Interesting you get the Disney logo here, but you are just playing the game at this point. So you get to select in DuckTales one of several locations. You're trying to collect quite a bit of collectibles and currency. And then once you've done all the locations, you're done with the game. So it is just your standard NES platformer. The weirdness here is that you can only take out things by pushing down and hitting the person. Like, you should be able to swing a cane, but it is not working here. And to get that, yeah, you have to probably walk next to something like that to swing the cane. And you have to land on these to get your resources. It's very weird. I'm feeling a real slowdown happening here too. Doesn't feel like it's running well. Yeah. The emulation's terrible. This isn't just because my computer. You do have rewind abilities, but this is probably just RetroArch in the background. So potentially looking at just how far you can rewind will tell you how much of a buffer it's saving, which perhaps it's saving far too much of the buffer, because that does seem like that is going to the entirety of the beginning of the game, which I would argue maybe this is too much cheating even for an NES game that's really difficult. Yep, that rewound all the way back to the beginning of the game. That should have dropped an item, but it didn't. Notice how items here are disappearing fairly quickly. And notice how I didn't see that plant as a threat, which is another problem. It's all very much trial and error. Here we have some kind of Donkey Kong Jr. action. And so when you run into games like this, your only hope is that you possibly have small enough levels that you could work your way through this. Remake takes these ideas of a level layout as a concept and then expands on them greatly. There is quite a lot of secrets in these areas, but you have to kind of know about them or figure them out. His cane springs you up some more, hitting the wall. And this is just something you'd never see in a game where you're going above the level. See, this spider is going to try and kill you. There's probably not really a way to avoid hitting the top of the spikes there. You can see how the game literally only gives you a minimal amount of time also. So even if you were going to make your way through it, the fact that the screen flickers when you pan over to a new area might be accurate emulation, but I don't know if people really want accurate emulation as much as people may just want widescreen or full-on remake. It's a shame that there weren't more remakes being made, and see, that's pretty much the end of the level. So gotta land somewhere. And this really highlights how rewinding isn't that useful. Actually, this may not be the end of the level. This may be just a shortcut to another section. Alright, well, that's enough of that. So if you were going to play a time attack, I would assume you, in that case, have to rush through a whole section, rewind not being available. And see, that is just an awful layout. Now you're addressing the fact that it's at a 4:3 ratio by effectively and no voice acting, nothing like that. You're addressing the 4:3 ratio in a terrible way by putting it to the right side. I keep trying to hit the X button, so I guess I probably should have left the buttons in the same place. It is kind of crazy that you would have 6 levels in a game. But in all fairness, Remake does manage to do it to make it much more interesting of an experience. Let's see, now I can't pause into the regular menu, I'm pausing into this menu. So I want to get out of the menu. Let's see what happens if I hit start and select. There is this central problem, certainly, where a lot of games probably don't have the source code easily available, or the source code is written in such a weird way for such weird old technology that it wouldn't help you that much in trying to make a remake. And you probably would have to remake these other games just from scratch using the general concepts. It's funny, you can select difficulty as an option. It's easy, normal, or difficult. Oh, not difficulty. Difficult. Apparently it was right bump and left bump that let me exit this. Is that 7 minutes and 16 seconds? Let's watch one. Let's see what a time attack all looks like. Just as an example. This will be interesting. People are going to move very fast here. But I wouldn't be surprised if this is people cheating and using tool-assisted speedruns or something like that. Although it may not be. I have no idea how this was made. But there you have someone going to the moon and then seemingly glitching through the screen to go lower. And then into the first boss fight. And I guess that's why it pulled the Steam name. Now, why does he have so much money, though? To start with. Maybe he just earned that much money. Like, going to different locations doesn't actually give you anything, though. Like, it doesn't give you extra health, where you could play the easiest first and then more difficult ones later. You can see there that that level was incredibly short. And that's a little atypical even for NES games. But it certainly explains why they were always so difficult, or very often so difficult. And these are definitely games where they are encouraging you to play them multiple times over and over again. Yeah. Again, that feels like he's doing some kind of glitch. Yeah. It's pretty obvious why you couldn't sell these games individually. That they're just so incredibly short, so old-fashioned. Apparently you do get 1 million plus whatever your time is for beating the bosses. And I guess that also highlights that I didn't actually get that far in that level. I thought I was further along than that. But it is a night and day comparison too. I beat this game and had a pretty decent time playing it, from what I recall, in its remastered, remade state. not a remaster, a full-on remake. In the remake, there's, I think, more rooms, more levels, just smoothed out boss fights, smoothed out controls. I wouldn't even say the remake of DuckTales was particularly amazing in the way it controlled and played, but it certainly gets the job done. There might be a way in some of these levels to not fight the boss and exit, but I'm not sure about that. It looked like maybe you could do that. So that teleports you back to Transylvania, and you actually do need a key. So I guess I was wrong about that being the case. I don't feel like I ran into any problems like that in the remake, though. A lot of these characters you definitely wouldn't recognize unless you had watched almost the entirety of DuckTales. If you'd just seen a portion of an episode, I don't think you'd recognize, like, this boss, per se. Which, yeah, it's... A game collection like this is probably best as an advertisement for your cartoons and a Disney Plus offering in which these cartoons would be available to stream. I don't have Disney Plus, so I don't know if you really can stream these on that service, but certainly it's never been advertised in a way that I've seen that any of the old Disney cartoons are prominent. They're much more interested in having you watch their new content on Disney Plus, or watch Star Wars or Marvel focused content. Like, weirdly, on Disney Plus, I don't even know if you can watch some version of the original Star Wars movies, the sequels, episode 4, 5, and 6. Probably can, but it's probably not the version you want to watch. I'm really shocked by this, where we have about 1 minute and 16 seconds left, and there's nothing really surprising on this time attack. It all seems like this is fairly doable if you can actually do it. So we cleared all the lands and ended up back in Transylvania, as he jumped over the girl so he didn't get stuck in a conversation. Little speedrunner optimizations here. Although I doubt the speedrunning community is really huge for these kinds of games. A lot of games like these tend to feel fairly perfected in the sense that unless you find a new glitch, or you're only gonna cut down a speedrun by a few seconds. So you go back to the exact same place and you find a different boss in Transylvania. And that's the entirety of DuckTales, the original DuckTales game. And while you would have oh, we've got another boss fight. Oh, some kind of chase sequence. But apparently the time attack doesn't count that chase sequence if there is actually any more content there. Now, it does look like the time attack would save your best run and show you that. Interesting. You could do all, or you could just filter the leaderboards to friends or your rank. So So the other option here would be to see a boss rush, which is not really too much difference, I'm sure, because it's just going to load in probably a RetroArch save state where the character starts right at the boss fight. I can't really blame Disney for not doing too much with DuckTales. It would be kind of crazy to overemphasize it or try to bring it back and make it the next big thing. It's interesting you get this artsy fartsy text popping up after you beat it. But I really hate this interface, and there's no adjusting that. Whereas if you were just using the ROMs in RetroArch, you could have shaders to stretch things out to widescreen if you wanted to do that. You could have side art of your own custom form on the side. There's a lot of like Disney symbols and Disney Channel themes in the background art, but DuckTales really doesn't have anything too much to do with Mickey Mouse. And I wouldn't put it past a few people to really love DuckTales and not like Mickey, or vice versa. Okay, so that is the boss rush element, which I guess does allow you to potentially skip the more annoying parts of DuckTales, but it's not like the boss rushes are going to be much better. So then Chippendale's Rescue Rangers is the next game coming out 1 year later. You get different back art here. You can do one player Chippendale. It's still an NES game, so no voice acting, and the text is going to be pretty huge. It is pretty much just a platforming game. This time, Chippendale can pick up apples, it seems, and throw them. But they get hurt on robotic dogs, and they get hurt on... You can pick up boxes and throw them too. Now, there's no consistency here, and no desire for consistency, so you're picking up a lot more boxes and throwing boxes instead of doing what would have been a kind of weird system of using a cane to attack lower sections. Suffice it to say, though, you're also missing the ability to select different areas. Now, there are secret stars that can be collected, but they don't seem to really do too much for you. You're definitely going to have a lot of repetition here. Just trying to pick up boxes and throw them. With only 3 hearts. There we've gotten a character I couldn't even tell you the name of as a power-up. I assume the electric rat there is a bad guy. Died 3 times and that's game over. You can then continue. And left bump and right bump. Alright, so some of this I guess we could play with. So you can go widescreen here. You can add a TV filter and you could turn off the border. So So yeah, the TV filter adds the appearance of interlacing, which would be more accurate to the way you would have seen it. Although in all fairness, watching an interlaced video on a cathode ray tube monitor, it makes that fairly less obvious visually, and you really never would have in this time had that much of interlacing happening. And it's just a real dumb filter to have on. You can also make it look like a monitor there, which that just is doing a little less interlacing, and having both vertical and horizontal black lines to make it look a little pixely. Although there really shouldn't be much of a difference. But those aren't particularly the filters you would really want. Being full screen works, but you could also see people wanting to stretch things out, although it is fairly obvious. Man, this interface on the menu does not work well at all with the analog stick. At least the analog stick responds. It's fairly obvious with a game like this, though, that the squares stop being square. But you're playing these games with 8 directions enabled in them. And this is like literally the second time I've ever played this game, and I'm already doing, I think, considerably better. Not that I'm any kind of great, like, NES era player. I played a lot of NES back in my day, but I wouldn't say I was particularly that much better than your average person. Although it's kind of hard to tell in things like the NES era, because it's not like there were local tournaments, and it's not like kids were super honest about how well they were with a game, or how good they were at games. They would often, I'm sure, hype themselves up and lie about their level of success. This really is a game that seems like you'd be best just to grab and throw everything you can grab. And when you get a power-up, run from the power-up as fast as possible. It's weird that you're going left in the NES game. It's weird that you die just falling off the screen. Yep. So that's basically as much as I'm willing to go with this game. Now weirdly, the A button is supposed to be the B button here. That's what I set it up as. And then the B button is supposed to be the A button, which I have an Xbox controller. The A button is on the left and the B button's on the right, versus the Japanese style where the A would be on the right and the B would be on the left, as being depicted here. So when I highlight quit here and hit the B button, which should be the A button, I should quit. And yet I don't. So the controller settings, and this is something that you can run into problems with RetroArch don't seem to actually affect the menu. Once again, we have a time attack, which seems like it's only 10 minutes, so let's do it. Let's just watch the fastest person on this leaderboard play all of Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers. This will be interesting. Let's see if maybe I could do something here. As far as... Nope, you can't change or stretch it out, unfortunately. You can pause it. Even in 2017, though, you have to really admit that if you cared to see a playthrough through Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers, going to YouTube or Twitch and watching a speedrun would probably be your default thought as to how to achieve that goal. You wouldn't pay to own these games to then not play them like I am, unless you're a crazy person like me who just has too many Steam games for their own good, which is probably most Steam users. But yeah, for the most part, the reason why you would buy something like this is to justify then having a legal copy of these games to then buy download a ROM or rip a ROM and use it in a larger collection of emulated sections. So you have an overworld map after you get past that first level, assuming you get past the first level. This also highlights these are the kinds of games that necessitated owning a Game Gear or some other kind of cheat device or codes to actually even get past the first level. I would have just assumed that those waterfalls were background and you didn't have to do anything to get past them. So far, I'd say this game feels less connected to the cartoon. Although I never saw a Chip 'n Dale's cartoon in general, just the movies that I know of. But I would have a hard time even remembering what the movies were about. Weirdly, these aliens are in the game in the first place, and then they seem to be changing their appearance to look like Dale, which would be very confusing, to say the least. Yeah, that female chipmunk lady, or I recognize her, and there's almost certainly a generation of furries, or perhaps not furries who want to dress up as anthropomorphic animals, but people who are oddly attracted to anthropomorphic animal creatures that can say that their initial creation of their fetish came from these Disney cartoons and characters like that lady, although it's not like I can actually name her. Sadly, I didn't have the Disney Channel when these cartoons were airing, and basically I've never had the Disney Channel in any of its former factors. But there also was definitely a point where I would have been available and capable of getting the Disney Channel, and they stopped really focusing on cartoons, and the Disney Channel stopped being as appealing. I feel like her name is Rocket or something, or Gidget, or Gadget. it would be incredibly unacceptable to sell a game that can be beaten in 10 minutes, even by a speedrunner. Now, maybe arguably if you sold the game and then 6 months or a year after the game's been released they found some glitches and they could speedrun it in 10 minutes, that's fine. And there's been years certainly to figure out all the patterns and potential glitches in these games, but even if you weren't speedrunning, if you got through Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, probably only going to take 30 or 40 minutes in total. Seems like you can skip some locations here. Well, I have no idea what the plot line is here at all. At the very least, on the first game, I knew that Uncle Scrooge was taking on bad guys to get treasures, and I think the treasures have been stolen from him. Whereas here, it really is just a random assortment of enemies and a few platforming sections. We have made massive improvements over what is considered decent and acceptable levels of platforming since these days. Although in all fairness, this isn't that different from what a Cuphead level could be. And I would say that's probably what games like this probably inspired the severe difficulty that exists in Cuphead, to my own dismay. I really wish Cuphead had made more of its game more accessible to people who are just not used to playing difficult games like that. So he throws some flowers to the lady, and then the rocket goes up, and then the rocket comes down to another section. That almost feels like that would have potentially been the end of the game. Although in all fairness, you can see there's seems to be about 4 more levels in this game compared to DuckTales. But then there's also kind of a gap between DuckTales 1 and DuckTales 2. But it's not going to be a generational gap. It is insane to have characters changing their appearance to look like the player character. That's just trying to confuse the player. There seems to be no counters going on, weirdly, on the number of flowers you collect. So, it seems like nothing gives you an extra life, or anything like that. And then Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers really should be a team, so even if you're playing first player, it would make a lot of sense for your secondary character to show up at the end and say, "Congratulations, you did it," or something. Being able to select one character seems to not change any of the ways the game plays. So if you like Chip, you play as Chip. If you like Dale, you play as Dale. Although weirdly, if this guy was speedrunning, why did he spend the extra move to play as Dale if that's the case? So there might be a slight difference in how it plays. Although it doesn't seem like that's the case. But yeah, you really would have to ask why. Why would you go through all of this? Particularly if you were playing the game in a normal level of skill in which you would die over and over again. And Game Genies can skip you to levels in a lot of games, but they couldn't rewind time like the emulators can. It is weirdly still a case for emulators on underpowered things like Raspberry Pis that you wouldn't have enough storage or you wouldn't have enough processing power to fully run these games at their actual frame rate that they would have been on the original hardware. Although, in fairness, a lot of these games probably ran pretty terribly even on the original NES. But on my computer, or anybody's average computer, gaming computer from the past 5 or 6 years, you should be able to run this game perfectly without anything that looks like a frame rate stutter. And I just don't feel like this implementation is doing that. So you've got some kind of fat cat character in the boss battle, and it just ends there. There would have almost certainly been credits to the game if you could make it to the credits. Weirdly, that is not showing up here. I should have looked at these. Yeah, for every 100 flowers, a 1-up star appears. For every 20 stars collected, a 1-up star appears. So yeah, Gadget, Monterey Jack, Zipper, Buzzer, bunch of names of characters, Fat Cat. Yeah. So that's Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers. So 1 year next, Capcom, clearly they just kept on getting approval from Disney to make more video games, made TaleSpin. So this time let's actually look at how to play first. Fly up and down and left and right, so we're going to be flying apparently. So this might be like a shoot 'em up, and then B flips upside down and A fires a cannon. Interesting. So it does seem like this is a just side-scrolling shooter, not a shoot 'em up per se. To several different locations, which, okay. I guess at a certain level that makes sense. And I really haven't played any of these games before, so let's go ahead and do this correctly. And do that. That's really, in my opinion, the best way to play. Although, what is the difference between being full screen and being original? It's just not stretching the pixels. It's doing a closer to 1-to-1 ratio, although it's probably scaling the pixels on the original, which, yeah, this is probably for every 1 pixel at what would have been 512 lines of interlaced video, which basically you would think for an NES that's probably 512 lines, 512 pixels versus 512 pixels. You double that in both directions, and that would be a 2x scaling upwards. So for every 1 pixel, you have now 4 pixels being taken up for a 1080p screen, and then the extra is black bars all around it. Whereas full is just scaling everything up and then stretching it. But I would personally say full is probably the way you want to play it. People are willing to put up with black bars on 2 sides. They're not really willing to put up with black bars on 4 sides. Again, you start with some text, where weirdly some of these games barely started with text or didn't start with text again. I remember TaleSpin as a cartoon, but I could not for the life of me tell you what the actual story was. So weirdly, this is a platforming game that seemingly at the last second, and I assume these have all been programmed pretty much with the same code, just slightly modified. I only have one shot that can be on screen, but these bubbles are pretty obviously 4 or 5 of those can be on screen. There was definitely a problem with NES and even Super NES games, though that let's fly upside down, let you go backwards. Sometimes the screen scrolls, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah, there was a problem with NES and Super NES games where there was a limited number of particles because there was a limited amount of RAM. I don't see a way I'm gonna get through that. That seems just crazy. You would have to get so incredibly close to these things. Some of these things obviously can't be destroyed, I'm now figuring. You can just be squished. Yeah, it would just take a lot of effort. And a lot of cheating, and a lot of rewinding. This is effectively save scumming at a massive level. And see, software like RetroArch being able to rewind, and the emulators that RetroArch integrates as cores being able to rewind, most of the cores can, is about the most amount of help you can probably ever expect for actually beating these games. And it's not really enough help. See, they just home in on wherever I am. Yeah, and I have no idea how many times I need to hit this guy. But yeah, wherever you go, they want to home in on that, so I have to yeah, I don't know if you could really beat this guy. Like, it's not like it's rewinding and undoing my hits, so I've hit him multiple times. Job well done. So we actually made it to the end of a level of a game. So I'm actually really shocked on that. And then apparently if we purchase or find the parts, we can repair things. Like super rapid shot, which we can't afford. We continue. Let's speed booster. And an assistant, like mini sea duck playing behind you. So I spent the money hitting the wrong button. I thought I got a mini sea duck there, but weirdly I didn't. Alright, well, once again, let's just watch what a time attack looks like. It is getting longer, certainly, at 16 minutes to go through these games, to the point where I might consider breaking up this episode, but honestly I'm doing such a poor job of covering these games, and I kind of knew I was going to do that anyways. I knew I was never going to be able to properly play these games. Maybe there would have been a slight miracle that I would have found one of these games fairly easy and been willing to put up with all of the antiquated ways in which these games are not optimized at all and are literally designed to fight against rental stores where a lot of people definitely would rent video games instead of paying what would have been the equivalent of about $90 for a video game. Particularly games like this that you might, if you're lucky, if it's easy, beat in an evening. Yes, games in the past really were only $30. Oh, you really can destroy those. But $30 back then would have been about $90 today. So video games were very expensive, and there was fewer of them available in the first place. I didn't realize you could shoot diagonally. That probably would have been helpful too. So on the NES, if you were shooting diagonally, you would have had to been pressing like the left forward and the down button, or the left forward and the up button. Two buttons at the same time, effectively. And so he just takes 2 hits of damage to get through the first level quickly, so he must have a strategy. Otherwise, he collected, I imagine, a lot more resources. And so now all of a sudden he's got a rapid fire ability, which really should have just been available at the very beginning. It kind of feels like his ship might be smaller, but I don't know if that's the case or not. Again, this is very much the kind of game that almost certainly a tool-assisted speedrun has perfected. You just don't have any variety or randomization in the character layouts or the enemy locations or much of anything. It is a bit of a shame that even now, though, if you were teaching a middle school, junior high programming class, you still probably couldn't teach kids how to program a video game like this. Not that you'd want them to program a video game like this in the first place, but yeah. The basically assembly code style of programming that you would be doing for NES games is just not in any way relatable to using some engine like the Unreal Engine or Unity, or even using something like Pygame for Python to do an introductory early programming. video game aspect. If you get into like more industry standard engines like the Unreal Engine and Unity, you have to learn quite a bit just to do your first steps to make a project that you would probably be fairly overwhelmed before you got to the point where you make even your first game. But you probably would also make a game much closer to Flappy Bird than an NES game. Getting 8-bit graphics or animating 8-bit graphics would use more specialized 8-bit graphic generation studios. RPG Maker is about the only engine out there that would get you something close to looking like an NES or Super NES game. And nobody likes RPG Maker games for their repetitive, overused graphics that low-effort game developers put on Steam and try to sell on the cheap. And even at that, if you were to make an RPG Maker game, you still wouldn't be able to program a side-scroll shooter. There probably is an engine specializing side-scrolling shooters or shoot-em-ups in general, but a modern shoot-em-up would be much better than this is. I really don't even know what this is, because maybe TaleSpin came fairly early, but shoot-em-ups in arcades, even in the time that this game came out, would have been better visuals and had more enemies on the screen. Like, maybe there would have been a fairly large difference between trying to make a shoot-em-up for a console and a shoot-em-up for an arcade. Yep. So 6 minutes to get to the third level, to the end of the third level. So halfway through the game. And it's effectively kind of doing the Mega Man trick, in that every level, if you have enough money, buys you an outfit. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if some of this layout is exactly from DuckTales. They probably would have moved things around a little bit, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there's entire screens that have different positions. This whole game screams that they took a lot of the general ideas from DuckTales and Chippendales and just copied it into a completely different style of game, which it doesn't make any sense at all. I've never seen a side-scrolling shooter where you're maneuvering yourself around platforms. It's frankly crazy. And side-scrolling shooters would have been new, I guess, back in the day when this would have come out. And so anything new would have probably had some enthusiasm around it, and certainly having DuckTales as a licensed name on it would help. Video games never really have had a good history of licensed properties. He's just out flying the ghost here. Almost all licensed video games are lackluster in one way or the other. Still no clue as to what the story really here is supposed to be. I feel like the TaleSpin cartoon almost certainly had the characters on the ground interacting with humanoid people a lot more than this game would imply. I doubt they were spending a lot of animation time in the skies flying around, because that would have been expensive to animate and take more work. I wonder if we've hit a point here now where he's speedrunning beyond trying to actually get money because that would just slow things down. And certainly games like this might literally lose some frames by picking up an item, or by him moving to pick up an item. No idea what's going on here, and I have no idea who these characters are. I would almost assume that the Disney afternoon lineup was 3 greenlit cartoons at least that Disney really committed to, and unless all of the cartoons failed miserably, they probably were more willing to let all the cartoons go for a while. Although, not forever. I definitely remember that DuckTales and TaleSpin were popular enough that they were selling like baseball trading card style things and merchandise. In the same kind of vein. Actually, I think they were selling stickers in blind collectible packs to fill in like a sticker book. I think I had that when I was a kid, trying to find all the stickers for the sticker book and probably wasting a lot of my parents' money on what was something that I absolutely would have forgotten about and not cared about after a few months. I wouldn't be surprised if there was dolls and merchandise and things, comic books. Yeah, almost certainly. Nothing to the level of, say, Pokemon, which really redefined what over merchandising looks like, but yeah, but there was a lot of this. And I imagine even now, if you were to go to Disneyland or Disney World, you'd probably see some DuckTales characters somewhere. There'd probably be a ride based on DuckTales characters. If there isn't a ride based on DuckTales or Darkwing Duck, I would suspect that they had just relabeled a ride and changed the name, which, yeah, they do that sometimes. They'll swap things out and for a new coat of paint over the same roller coaster style ride. Or yeah, if I was in charge of Disney, I don't know what I'd really do with these. So I'd say keep it cheap, but keep it in production. It would make a lot more sense to make Mickey Mouse cartoons than it would make sense to make DuckTales cartoons, but I would say there should be some kind of DuckTales cartoons going on. People should know it exists. Obviously the original cartoon should be on Disney Plus. Disney Plus is in a unique position where they could take a lot of the old short cartoons that would have played before movies and have them play before movies on Disney Plus. So you go down to watch, say, Marvel's Avengers, and then there's a Steamboat Willie style 3-minute cartoon playing in front of it. Although that would kind of take away a lot of choice and irritate people. It would be an interesting feature, certainly. At the very least, you could take old cartoons and put ads between them on YouTube, if you can't do anything else with them. Or use an old cartoon like Steamboat Willie, which is older than DuckTales by far, as a way of advertising Disney Plus. Yeah. if I was launching Disney Plus, if I was in charge of that, which why would I be in charge of Disney or launching Disney Plus, I probably would have said, let's play Steamboat Willie in its entirety, which probably wouldn't work because that's too long of a cartoon, and maybe play a small clip of it for a 30-second clip during the Super Bowl, and then you put on the text after showing that 30-second clip. This and 400 plus other animated shorts, all available uncensored, unedited on Disney Plus. Live the nostalgia of your parents, which Steamboat Willie really would be more nostalgic of either your parents or your grandparents more than it would be even the nostalgia of your average 30-year-old. So the game is longer. Is this game better? Not really. I feel like you would have tighter and better controls with Chippendales in comparison, but you do have more upgrades. So if you took the platforming tighter controls you probably would have with Chippendales and had the upgrades of TaleSpin, then that might work fairly well. Although inherently that is getting just closer and closer to making the Mega Man game. And this would be the era in which the Mega Man games came out. And certainly, even in the case of Mega Man games, they made a lot of them because those games were short and really only lengthened by their difficulty. It's kind of a shame that they haven't made a new Mega Man game that, instead of having only 9 characters, really pushes it to the limit and has, say, 36 different bosses, with each level being fairly short, but each boss giving a new ability. And then you would probably have something closer to like the Binding of Isaacs, where in that game you get different abilities that interact with each other. Well, that was an abrupt ending once again. I really wish they would play the credits at that point, or that there would just be a way to play the credits. So that's 1991. Next year you have Darkwing Duck. 1992. They really did just put out a new game every year, which I'm surprised that they succeeded as far as they did with that. Yeah. It does seem a little crazy to overwork your employees at Capcom in particular. So let's give this a try. Again, first time ever playing this. I can hear even the audio, like clips, as it loads in the ROM and releases and activates the audio device. Although, I guess, in fairness, speaking of audio, at least this 2017 game works, where Castle of Illusion was the game I wanted to play from Disney, and it's not a Capcom game, it's a Sega Australia game of all things, and it absolutely just does not work. It's got way too many problems. So, perhaps a little bit better of a layout here with the text, but the amount of reading you would have to read in these games is not anywhere near what you would read in an even average game. Now, look here how it is 3 lines with maybe 6 words in each line. Of course, little kids probably aren't going to want to read it all, and we can select one of 3 locations. So we're back to selectable locations, unlike the 2 previous games. get a description of where we're going. Darkwing Duck, obviously a parody of Batman. Although, I think the parody is in part that he is comically inept. Interesting, I can't jump up over the edge, but I can jump up on the girdle, grab it. Can I shoot while grabbing? No. It looks like we have switches we're interacting with. It definitely feels more like a video game here. Now weirdly, though, I have a shielded cape that doesn't seem to do anything. It feels like you have infinitely spawning enemies, which that sucks. Doesn't feel like there's any real level of controls here. There's a level of floatiness you kind of would want in video games. You kind of want the bullets to kill one person quickly instead of having to shoot 2 or 3. I'd like to be able to target the enemies. Clearly there's whole generations and room for improvement here. It just seems like it resets you. Yeah, and all I have is the A and the B button for all these games, so the TG in the section over there in the top left, I have no idea what that stands for. It's a little shame that you can't drop the bullets on the enemies, or drop the beams on the enemies. So you're supposed to get on all those hooks. Not 100% sure how you get to the hooks though. Again, I only have A and B, and I'm pressing A, and A doesn't do anything. A and up is what you have to do. Now you got one up, so there must be a certain amount of life, or maybe I just didn't reach high enough in the game to need to engage with the life system yet. This cape really feels useless, though. Just can't imagine that there would actually be a time where you actually blocked an attack. Alright, I'm done with this game. Well, I guess if we were going to use Thunder Gas, you press start. But then what? Like, start button doesn't do anything. Oh, select button maybe activates it. Ah, so that's how you shoot diagonally. And so you have a different kind of attack you can engage with. And so you're using the select button to switch attacks. Now I can't really make a real statement to say, yeah, this feels more like a video game, but yes, it does feel a little bit more like a video game than the previous ones, but only ever so incrementally. There's still a lot of polish, and I would question if, even when these were being released, if it wouldn't have felt like minimal improvements were being made. It's very noticeable that that's that for that. Man, that is annoying sound effects when you select. I want to quit, which means using the D-pad to select quit, hitting the A button. This time it's 12 minutes to watch the entirety of the run. Yeah. People remember simplistic games like Duck Hunt or Donkey Kong on the NES because they were either included or sold a lot of copies. And then they remember more complicated games like Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3. Then you have like less likely to be remembered things, which is basically the entirety of everything else. There are other NES games, certainly to mention. Punch-Out! NES Football was kind of groundbreaking because it was basically the first sports console game. You have non-Nintendo licensed properties, so they chose a different location to go to, which gave them, I think, a different weapon to use. So it is really getting to that idea of Mega Man. He's just straight up taking hits. And his ability gives him like a platform to use. So then you get to a boss fight, which these arrow guns, I guess, shoot arrows. Yeah, that's what I bet it is. It's an arrow gun. And I'd assume it's the exact same phrase, "job well done," as the previous games. But yeah, it's really hard to think of what other games on the NES would really even be worth mentioning. Weirdly, most of the kids licensed Disney games just would not make it even to a second tier level of relevancy in my mind. Yeah, weirdly, even for a speedrunner, he's just taking the hits, which, yeah, I assume that's just the only way you actually succeed at this game in a reasonable amount of time, is you just take the hits and move forward. So he's still got the arrow gun, but I think he unlocked the other gun. There's basically no way I would have ever made it past that section. He seems to be switching between using and not using the arrow gun at some random points. Punch-Out! Is the one game I wish they had made more games for from the NES era, but I mean, they made Punch-Out!, they made Super Punch-Out!, they made a remake of Punch-Out! For either the Wii or the Wii U that didn't sell that well, or isn't that well known. Punch-Out! Is an interesting game in that it is effectively a pattern recognition dancing game pretending to be a boxing game, whereas almost every other boxing game is trying to actually emulate boxing. These Zapper games, people remember Duck Hunt and Logan's Alley, but that's about it. And people completely forget about the Rob the Robot games that used Rob the Robot. It probably was the Final Fantasy 1, 2, and 3 were probably on the NES. If not the NES, they were on the Super NES. And those games probably sold like hotcakes in Japan, but are completely undersellers, I'm sure, in America, in the West, in general. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is somewhat remembered from the NES game, but mostly remembered in the fact that it is, if not technically impossible, it is effectively impossible to win the game. Yeah. Honestly, if I think about it, the vast majority of my experience on the NES was eventually just being very frustrated with it. Thank goodness that they produced the Super NES fairly quickly. Otherwise, I think kids would have eventually realized how frustrating a lot of the games were. Of course, we didn't really have a lot of other things to do with our time back then either. So now you have a whole new selection of 3 other locations after defeating a werewolf duck or were-duck. It's all duck pun based. Yeah. Modern kids with the internet, TikTok, YouTube, Twitch, smartphones, like all those opportunities, streaming services like Netflix and Disney Plus, like all of that has so much competition for the attention spans of kids that kids these days are spoiled for choice, to use a phrase, not to really say that I think they're spoiled in general. I think they've just been given more opportunities to pick and determine what they want to spend their time on, whereas previous generations it was catch as catch can, and you would just enjoy it, or you would read a book, and people generally didn't want to read a book. Games like this certainly confuse me as to why you see so many, like, particularly you see a lot of games that try to ape the aesthetics and copy the aesthetics of Game Boy games. So you'll have these 8-bit graphic looking games that sometimes are not actually even 8 bits of color and are actually going for more of the 4 shades of gray that the original Game Boy looks like, or they would be monochrome, just black and white. And then the sprites and the items are all just animated and zoomed in on a very high level, so that each screen is very small. Even in this case, for this game, this is nowhere as bad as a Game Boy game can be, as far as being zoomed in. If I was to guess, Darkwing Duck here is probably somewhere around 32 by 32 pixels of the 512 by 512 pixels a screen probably would have had. I don't know if that's really the native resolution that the NES ran at, though. Wouldn't be surprised if it ran even lower than that. But yeah, I don't know where people's nostalgia seems to come from, that they want to play, or people at least want to sell Game Boy looking games on Steam. But there are a few people, certainly, that try to make games that look like this. And you could do a little bit better than this visual style and make a game that would be acceptable in my opinion. But you would have to do a little bit better. You need to really target the level of graphics of a Super NES or even of what a Nintendo 64 2D game might look like, although I can't really mention a single 2D Nintendo 64 game that was ever released, because Nintendo 64 was definitely going for 3D, and inherently game developers get too excited about new technology and abandon anything they would have ever learned. That section felt very much like a Mega Man experience. Which inherently, if I was going to play Mega Man games, I'd probably just want to watch some other speedrunner run through them too. But yeah, Super NES level graphics can be acceptable. Although ideally, you can have something like River City Girls come out, and the River City series is kind of a great example of this, and inherently there would have been probably at least one River City game originally on the NES. This is crazy amounts of platforming. But it does feel like an actual video game here. You aren't just flying around the TaleSpin ship. Or at least feels way more like a platformer, and the level layout makes a lot more sense as a platformer. But yeah, River City Girls brings back the feel of a beat-em-up game, but uses a much more higher resolution screen space and animates things in a much more modern anime style with bright, colorful characters, which it then became fairly weird after River City Girls was received particularly well that they released remakes or re-releases or other spin-offs of River City Ransom, which that would be the River City Ransom series, that looked much more like an 8-bit old game. Which, yeah, I don't know why you do that. I think once you saw you had a success in a new style, you probably should have just rebooted the whole series and tried to resell the old games with remastered artwork. It would be fairly easy to remaster a beat-em-up game without touching the controls by much, although you would ideally want to have just better controls, tighter controls, more actions, more animations when you are pressing a button. We are nowhere close, as far as this game, to the idea of having the A button do multiple things based on the situation. I guess in DuckTales, if you were next to something, pressing the A button swung his cane, whereas pressing the swing cane button did nothing if you weren't near anything that you could interact with. But generally, you would like to see in a beat-em-up game in particular, the A button do like a left, then a right, then an uppercut, then a jab. Just even though you're doing the same action button to make the character feel more lifelike. Of course, these old 8-bit NES games can't really animate that. There wouldn't have been enough RAM or memory. So that's Darkwing Duck. I guess I genuinely understood the story around that game. Like, it's not super crazy to figure out that he's being Batman and he's taking on bad guys. The platforming on that was really crazy. So yeah, for the first time in my life, let's try Darkwing DuckTales 2. Let's go ahead and just skip that. Take easy. So, fairly major improvement in what would have probably been about 4 years, I think, difference there. Now, instead of just selecting a location via a screen, we have Scotland because it's labeled at the top, and a picture, although this continent is fairly crazy. Like Bermuda, Egypt, Moo. I don't know what Moo is. That might be a made-up location. It seems like there's an icon for each of these locations. Alright, so let's try Moo. We're getting more text. I'd say I can pretty much say it feels like that it is much more tight controlling. So I wouldn't be surprised if there actually are like people that are nostalgic for this game, and that made the argument to remaster the first game, or remake the first game, although that really irritates me because when they remade the first game, they should have probably added all the content of the second game into the first game. It definitely does feel like it's a little bit more controllable. So now I have like some kind of power adapter. But pretty obviously oh, you can pull platforms. Interesting. Although, pulling that just makes you lose it when you leave the screen. You could see how in a modern game they would have probably programmed it in such a way that you could have hit all those rocks at the same time. And there's obviously some kind of ability or skill that you're going to get to be able to reach certain areas. It's weird, it looks like you could squeeze between those two. It's weird you can only pull. Fall off the edge. But the controls feel pretty awful. Select item. Pause menu. So we have seemingly nothing I can do here. Alright, with that, I'm willing to quit here. I don't want this to go that long. Yes, it feels to me like while they've had mostly just taken the same concept and done it a second time with twice as many abilities, it does feel a little bit smoother of an experience. So it'd be interesting, I guess. So The original DuckTales was 1989, 1993, 4 years later. It'll be interesting to see if how long did it take to beat DuckTales on the leaderboard when hitting on buttons. Yeah, the AB in the menu doesn't change when it totally should. So 7 minutes to beat the first game. Let's see what the fastest run of the second game is. 9 minutes and 25 cents. 25 seconds. So not really a big difference there. Yeah, when they remade the game though, they totally should have included the second game as an option. So the speedrunner here chose the same location that I chose. Which probably means, if I was to guess, that the power adapter is the easiest to get. Well, no, you walked right past the power adapter. These are the kind of games also that very much established the idea of having strategy guides and making games that were difficult and had a bunch of secrets, so that you would either buy a strategy guide or call the Nintendo assistance line. I forget what it was called. I don't think it was called Nintendo Power. And which was a 900 number, which 900 numbers charged per minute some amount for talking to them, so it was really scammy. And Nintendo in general has always been a little scammy and a little greedy. People certainly were blinded to that fact when they were young, and really were not interested in hearing anything negative about their video game company, of which they really could have only switched over to like a Sega if they were mad at Nintendo for some reason. But yeah, there definitely was attempts to make games insanely difficult so that you would call the 900 number or buy a strategy guide so they could get even more money out of you. And inherently, it is also worth pointing out that while Nintendo is credited as saving the video game industry by selling the NES as a toy, they were ignoring the fact that in Japan they sold the Famicom as a family computer, and it had like a floppy disk drive eventually, and it had software that was implying that you could actually do more than just play specific video games on it. And Nintendo can't be solely blamed for being greedy in that era, because they really were just following the standard method of operating for almost all toy manufacturers and people making products for kids. And Atari and the Commodore certainly ruined the game industry through a lot of very poor, cheap, poor quality, expensive games, some of which were licensed, like E.T. for the Atari, although in all fairness, it's not like E.T. for the Atari, even though it's commonly thought that that was a game that was so bad that it ruined Atari. That doesn't seem to really be the case, because Atari was really suffering even before then, and it's not like there's a long list of good Atari games that most people could name anyways. There's a couple that might be worth mentioning, but barely worth mentioning. Now that's interesting that you have a movable platform here. Take note though just how well this player has the controls down for this game. Like, the controls are a little bit better, but only a little bit better than the first game. It's still very rough. And then at a certain point, you can't really have the controls anywhere close to what modern controls should be just because the resolution's so low. A character is going to move either 1 pixel forward when you hit the left stick, or you're going to have your game rendering sub-pixels, which Super Mario Brothers at least have sub-pixels. Super Mario Bros. 3 at least does, to run mathematical equations as to how many pixels you move forward depending on your speed. But yeah, until you start getting to at least 720p from 512 by 512. Well, actually it's a 4:3 ratio, so it probably wasn't a pure 512 pixels by 512 pixels, would it be? You'd have to divide 512 by 4, which would be 64. Yeah. No, I don't think I did that right. I don't think I did the math right at all. It'd be 128. Yeah. Yeah. So 128 multiplied by 3 then would be 384. Maybe? Yeah, it'd be somewhere around 400 pixels on the wide side and 300 pixels on the top side. Yeah. But yeah, until you get to higher resolutions like 720p, you can't have the characters small enough and enough room on the screen to have them move a little bit faster and control a little bit tighter. I hope what I'm saying makes some sense here. Maybe it doesn't. And this is a very weird way to look at a game and criticize it. And it's not a lot of criticism that I'm actually doing here. All these games are just archaic. They're too old to really play unless you have nostalgic for them, and you would have to have a heavy amount of nostalgia and probably a decent amount of skill to really want to play them. Inherently, this is the problem with even doing like a RetroPie build or any kind of RetroArch build on a Steam Deck, which is what I'd recommend now. Is you can get like a refurbished Steam Deck or even a brand new Steam Deck and then just have old games emulated that way, but the vast majority of games are not worth playing. Even if you do have nostalgia for them, you should probably just live in that nostalgic false reality where you think the games actually played better and were better. There's definitely times where I've played games and then I've fallen asleep and dreamt that the games were way better than they really were. For the several hundred games that were released for the NES, somewhere I think between 500 and 700 games I think were released for the NES, I could see myself going back and playing Punch-Out, and that's about it. Like, sure, I'd maybe put 5 minutes into Super Mario Brothers and Donkey Kong, Super Mario Bros. 1, 2, and 3, but I don't think I'd actually bother to play those games to the credits, which personally, I know I got to the credits of Super Mario Bros. 2, but I'm not sure I ever actually got to the credits of Super Mario Bros. 1 or Super Mario Bros. 3. Just because the games were hard and they had limited number of lives and a limited number of continues, and those are all things that just really shouldn't exist in modern games. You should be able to have an average gamer be able to make it to the credits, and that totally wasn't the case in the old days. It's interesting here that he won seemingly by attacking the top of the hand of this robotic character. Yeah. It is weird. It is effectively like, if we look at just the order here, Donald Duck leaves his leaves the nephews with Scrooge McDuck, and then you have Chippendales as a different type of animal, and then you have TaleSpin succeeding, and then you get back to ducks with Darkwing Duck, and the sidekick character here is the same sidekick character here in this game. So Darkwing Duck is obviously a spin-off of DuckTales, which is a spin-off of Donald Duck. You would think the whole Disney afternoon cartoons would then be hosted by Donald Duck, but noticeably Donald Duck doesn't really play a role. And so the last game, 1 year later, which, yeah, to go 5 years releasing a new game, is Chippendale Rescue Rangers 2, which, yeah, there is definitely a possibility that the controls might be a little bit tighter in this case, being the last game. They are effectively rewriting the instructions here. Also, it's a shame in all that artwork they didn't have scans of the original instructions. So again, for the first time in my life, I'll play this game. I imagine all these Disney games may have been more expensive, or they may have just been less common. Like, it's worth pointing out that the time frame that these games would have come out, it would have been hard to have a Toys R Us type store and even find games to buy. Again, we can play as Chipper Dale. Let's play as Dale this time. And you can play as 2-player, which most games these days don't bother to have 2-player, and I question how many people really do play 2-player. I think it's really more comes down to parents think kids will share when they really won't, and even kids that do have 2-player games tend not to have them play. They tend not to really want to play at the same time or play with each other. Here we have a bomb threat, which, yeah, in the post 9/11 world, certainly, that's not something you would probably put in a kid's game. Now, weirdly, they've changed the art style and they've gone with smaller characters instead of a zoomed-in cutscene, where I feel like they would have been better to have gone in with zoomed-in cutscenes. But maybe that means these characters are going to actually play a bigger role in the game instead of just being dialogue dumpers. Of course, that's all they're doing right now. And you can see there's a flicker happening under the text in the lower well, the upper right of the screen under the whiteness there. Either that is because of the filter they're using, or that is just, again, bad emulation. I seriously doubt that any of the RetroArch cores, had they been updated to a recent time, even in 2017, would have this level of poor performance and poor visual presentation. NES emulation is pretty well solved the issue. The only cores that somewhat struggle as far as emulating these days are the absolute most modern ones, and the weirdest of the hardware, which would be the NES and the PlayStation 3, because not the NES, the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation 3. So it's zoomed out more, but this does feel a lot faster, and when you all of a sudden have that level of movement, boy, does it feel like the game can just play, like you can really play the game more. And this is the kind of movement you really need in a platformer. It feels like there are less flowers to be collected, but instead you have the Rescue Ranger badges to be collected. Look at that. There's even secondary screens. So they're better on the branding by far. By giving a secondary screen, there's a potential here that that's a checkpoint. Let's see if that's the case. Now weirdly, this is seemingly the same area. Like being in the kitchen. Although, for all the improvements here, they do introduce this danger in that there's an enemy inside of boxes now. Although, they are alleviating the danger somewhat by highlighting it in a different way with different colors. Although, it wouldn't be super crazy for there to be a decent number of people who would have played games on an older TV that was still black and white. So, at a certain level, they might make a decent argument to color things with shaders and make sure games are somewhat playable. The glare and reflections on these glasses looks rather nice, and the turkey looks very nice too. So by zooming out a little bit, they've gained some pixels to make the visuals look better. Now, that didn't, I think, really help Dale's appearance any, but interesting. And this time, that helped you get to the end, instead of just giving you a bonus. I get my health refilled, another assistive thing. And we're having a whole cutscene before a boss fight. So, yeah. considerable improvement here in how they're breaking up the levels and how they're having an actual cutscene happen and how they've opted for a different scale for better visuals. The controls feel really better. I'd say probably twice as good. They probably, just by, like I was saying before, by scaling everything down, characters move twice as fast potentially, and can potentially have even twice the range of motion, instead of just a very stiff up, down, left, and right. So we've got a boss fight here, and then we gamed over. But in that, I clearly got way further in this game than I have any of the other games. But noticeably the length of these games are not that much longer. Even 5 years down the line, they really are just churning these out as cash cows. And how much of the money is going to Disney versus how much of it's going to Capcom, who knows? But interesting. So he selected 2 players, and then he's picking up the second player character, which I assume he's not actually controlling. So he's doing some speedrun strat here. And the speedrun strat, pretty obvious, is that he throws the second character for a small boost, which over the course of the game is going to help him. And then he basically swapped to the other character. So he's got to have like 2 controllers that he's just swapping back and forth between. Now this is kind of the problem with speedruns in general, though, is that you run into these situations where they start to have they start to have gimmicks and tricks that get outside of what is reasonable. I have no idea how he just attacked there at all, but whatever. That's why generally if I'm going to watch a speedrun, I want to watch a glitchless speedrun. Although in this case, I don't think we've seen a glitch so far, and we very possibly won't see a glitch. We're instead just seeing a strategy that is beyond what is expected, which is still a little too out of the norm. There's a lot of speedruns that have been made, particularly for events like Games Done Quick, but most recently, I would say most of the speedrunning events have run out of new games worth covering, and so many of the other older games have been covered multiple times. It's gotten fairly boring. And there's definitely something to be said about the presentation style of the Games Done Quick style speedruns, where people are talking and they have people sitting next to them describing what's happening, versus a general random speedrun you just find on YouTube, where it's a speedrunner who tends not to say anything at all and is just playing the game. Which this Time Attack is effectively a speedrun like that, where somebody is playing, but I don't know who that person is. I'm not getting their commentary or anything like that. I'm just seeing their gameplay. And in seeing their gameplay, I can say, yeah, this looks like a high-level gameplay from someone who I would assume has played these games multiple times over. And inherently, when you're talking games this young as far as the game generations. They just don't have a lot of story or cutscenes to happen. Like, I have, at this point, no idea why we're on a ship. He breezed through a couple of levels, and while we had the first bad guy say he placed the bomb, I haven't seen any dialogue happening at all. Feels like maybe there's a strategy of having a box crash into the head of Dale. Although I'm not sure what that is. And then there's this whole bonus game. Yeah, he's skipping all the cutscenes, so because he's speedrunning and skipping all the cutscenes, I have no idea why we're now on this icy location. Looks like you're inside a freezer or something. I suppose it's worth also pointing out this is effectively taking the idea of the borrowers, maybe they're called the Lilliputans too sometimes, the myth of small mystical magical creatures, taking that idea and just scaling everything as a miniature. They've taken that and then they made them squirrels, and then on top of that they made them private detectives, which would have been a genre that writers would have been familiar with back in the day, but really doesn't have any kind of relevancy in modern days. You definitely wouldn't make Chip and Dale detectives, and even in the time they came out, they're calling them rescue rangers instead of private investigators. If you were going to have small characters that saved the day and went on adventures, they probably wouldn't be squirrels. They'd probably be just more humanoid. And then you would have to establish why they're going on adventures. In a lot of ways, it'd probably be something closer to like the movie Up, where you have a robot going on an adventure, or two robots in Wall-E. No, not the movie Up, I'm thinking of the movie Wall-E. Yeah, Wall-E and Eve, these little robots going on an adventure. Let's see, has there been a Disney movie recently otherwise that had characters like that? Not really. I mean, they're making live-action remakes of things, so when they made like a live-action remake of the Lion King, you have anthropomorphic animals, or animals that talk, I guess, not really anthropomorphic. So, at the 7-minute mark, about halfway through this run, the game offers you 3 new locations to select levels from, which you would think if that was the way the game was going to play, you would have done that earlier. But I know at least the first level is set. There's clearly gimmicks that Capcom saw as sales points, that they wanted to say these games all had selectable levels as a sales point, and collectibles continues, and a certain number of lives and power-ups and things like that. Which, yeah, anything they could possibly sell the game on, they'd want to add. Bonus games would have been talked about on the back of the box. probably wouldn't make an adventure group cartoon based on smaller characters in the first place. So, you would probably have it be teenagers or preteen characters going on adventures instead. I imagine something like The Kids Next Door might be something like that. I haven't actually sat through it and watched it. Or there's a Netflix series called Daniel Spellbound, where a teenage kid goes on adventures, or a much better example, man, this is just running terribly. Very frame ratey. In all fairness, these games might have run really terribly originally, but that really is just more of an argument for a remake on these concepts. And yeah. In totality, each of these games is watching each of these games has taken about 2.5 hours, so if you took each of these games and merged them together into a new remake of the Disney Afternoon Collection, I think that might work fairly well. You could certainly take the TaleSpin sections and make those be little mini-game sections. You could have the platforming sections work fairly well interchangeably based on what character is in charge, or what character you're playing as. If I was playing as Darkwing Duck in this level, the platforming really wouldn't change much. Probably at a point where a young Indiana Jones concept being redone would make sense, since they're not likely to ever get another Indiana Jones movie. So that's the kind of adventure you might go with. There's some TV series, not with particularly kids or kid-friendly out there, but The Librarians TNT TV series and movie series, I think would work fairly well as a cartoon. Or oh, so he's just straight up cheating now, pausing the game and unpausing it to probably adjust a random seed. So it seems like his strategy is that he hits Dale in the head, and then Dell becomes invincible, and then he controls Dale as the attacker to beat the bosses. Well, Gadget doesn't seem to really play as much of a role here in this game. You could definitely make more Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers content though, since they already exist. There's a lot of visual flickering, it looks like, in this area, and I don't know if that's intentional or not. This is probably an example of something that might be seizure inducing also, but you definitely want to hope that that's not the case before re-releasing your game. So that guy always gives you 2 life health refills, whether you're playing with single player or one player, whenever you meet him, which seems to be only a couple times in the game. I don't particularly assume that the Chip 'n Dale's movies actually did particularly well. And, you know, I might be confusing the Alvin and the Chipmunks movie, that's spelling out danger, with the Chip 'n Dale's, with a Chip 'n Dale movie. They may not have actually made a Chip 'n Dale movie anytime recently. So we have now a robot fat cat, and again it's just throwing Dale as the only thing that seems like you could throw at the moment, so I don't know what you were supposed to do otherwise to defeat that guy. It didn't seem like there were any boxes showing up. It might have been better, certainly, to watch the 16-minute version of the game, in which he wasn't, in which I assume they wouldn't have been doing so many gimmicks. But yeah, I felt if you were going to try and do like the boss rush on this, even then you wouldn't be able to select the bosses. You'd almost certainly have to do them in order. And notice that the boss rush is about half of the entirety of the game. So yeah, a decent collection in the general sense of old games that you probably wouldn't want just as ROMs, and you would just want to install RetroArch on Steam and use RetroArch directly to launch. But kind of a poor implementation otherwise, and that tends to be the case, I think, with a lot of these collections and re-releases of very old games, is that they don't put a lot of effort into them. I would say it's nice that you have the soundtracks in the game. We pathetically don't get soundtracks accessible in a lot of modern games, and even if you do have a soundtrack, it's often sold as like DLC or given as DLC and hidden away on Steam, which most people don't even know that you can listen to soundtracks, and you probably own a few soundtracks for video games. The menu is very pretty, but the actual video game parts is lackluster. I would have preferred there to be a lot more extra art, specific extra art for each game, instead of just a generic gallery. I would have preferred if the visual settings were here by default at least, and then maybe you could have specific settings for each individual game too, but do you really even need specific settings? I prefer if the game doesn't take incredible amounts of time to save 5 settings, or that it takes a load to actually launch. I would have preferred that they didn't have Mickey Mouse showing up, but I mean, Disney branding, and this would have been on the Disney Channel. Ironically, you probably saw more of Mickey Mouse's silhouette than you actually saw of Mickey Mouse on the Disney Channel around those times that these games were coming out. But can I really recommend this game? No, not really. I can't recommend any of the games in there. They're too old. They're not that relevant. It's a shame none of them have been remade. It would make a lot of sense if you were a third-party developer to call up Disney and say, hey, I'd like to make a new DuckTales game. They'd probably tell you no, because they probably don't have any interest in promoting DuckTales. But yeah, you need to take these characters and make brand new games on them. Even the remake of the original DuckTales game was fairly lackluster. I had to make a decent amount of excuses for it, knowing it was based on an old game. Anyways, well, I guess we'll call this a quick look, technically. That's going to be it for this recording. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want to support me further, there's some links down below in the description box. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.